All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into a presentation from Elder Michael Johnson called The Masquerade in the Vineyard. It's all built around these two really big ideas. One is the vineyard, which stands for a pure spiritual lineage, and the other is something called the matrix, which is described as the system for passing that lineage on.
So what exactly is the matrix in this context? Well, it's not what you're thinking from the movies. The source material describes it as something much more profound. Think of it as a spiritual pipeline, a sacred transmission chamber. It's the mechanism through which inheritance, covenants, and true identity are meant to be passed down. It's kind of like a spiritual verification system that's supposed to confirm the source and lineage of everything that goes through it.
And right away, we hit the central problem. The entire argument of this presentation hinges on this one powerful question. What happens when that sacred system breaks down? It introduces this idea of a fundamental glitch, an error that it claims has corrupted the entire system and led to a massive, widespread deception, a masquerade. So what is this glitch? According to the source, it all comes down to the mingling of what's called the holy seed of Israel with the people of the world. Using that vineyard metaphor, it's like someone planted wild, foreign vines in a pure, consecrated vineyard. This single act is presented as the original corruption, a defilement that didn't just stop there, but created a problem that cascaded down through all the following generations.
Now, this is where a really crucial idea comes in, a core perceptual law. Think about it like this. Uncleanness is presented as being contagious. It spreads easily, almost like a plague. You touch it, you've got it. The source even uses the story of the woman with the issue of blood from Mark 5:25-34 to make this point. But holiness? That is a whole different ballgame. It's not contagious. It has to be deliberately transferred, intentionally poured from a pure, consecrated vessel. You can't just catch it by accident. And that distinction, well, it is absolutely central to the rest of the argument.
Okay, so this whole concept of corruption and intentional holiness leads us straight into the next major metaphor, marriage as a sacred mirror. The idea here is that this mirror is meant to perfectly reflect Jehovah's divine order, the proper relationship between the heavens and the earth. This is then mirrored in the relationship between a husband and wife, and ultimately between the Messiah and his people.
But what happens when that mirror shatters? That's exactly what the source claims happened. It describes a rebellion that completely inverted Jehovah's order. It's framed as the earth commanded the heavens to receive, basically wanting the power, the crown, without being willing to submit to the authority, the covering. And according to this teaching, that rebellion is magnified exponentially when the holy seed joins itself with the heathen.
So the big question then is, how did this all happen? How is this massive masquerade supposedly constructed? Well, the presentation lays it out in what it calls the 4 pillars of deception.
And here they are, the 4 steps to build the masquerade. First, you mingle the seed. Corrupt the bloodline itself to make it impossible to tell what's pure. Second, you steal the identity. The source makes a direct comparison to Esau, making false claims to an inheritance that isn't yours. Third, and this is a big one, you corrupt the doctrine. You start teaching that inheritance is just about your bloodline, totally ignoring the critical role of the Levites in sanctifying that lineage. And the final step, you subvert the culture, replacing original customs until the true heritage is all but forgotten.
So, after laying all that out, the presentation essentially throws down a challenge. It proposes what it calls a spiritual equation, or, even better, Jehovah's logic test. The whole point is to prove its claims by taking the promises made in the scriptures and holding them right up against the reality we see in the world today. Now, this entire test is built on one unshakable foundation from the law from Numbers 23:19. Jehovah is not a man that he should lie. His promises, therefore, simply cannot fail. So the logic follows, right? If you look around and you don't see the promised result, then one of two things must be true. Either the conditions for the promise haven't been met, or the covenant is being misapplied to the wrong people.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. On the left side, you have these powerful promises from Scripture. We're talking Ezekiel 28:26, Exodus 14:14, promises of dwelling in safety, of Jehovah himself fighting for you, of never being pulled from your land again. And on the right side, the source contrasts that with the observed reality post-1948. Constant war, reliance on military aid, a perpetual need for self-defense, and constant turmoil. According to this argument, the two sides just don't match up.
So, what's the ultimate conclusion from this logic test? Well, from the source's perspective, it's pretty blunt. This massive gap, this discrepancy between the promise and the reality, is presented as proof that the current claim to the covenant is invalid. The argument is simple. If these are the covenant people, then the result should be peace and safety. Since that result is absent, the premise must be wrong.
For the final piece of the argument, the presentation turns to the study of language and its own interpretation of history to try and, pull the mask off this whole alleged masquerade and challenge modern identity itself.
And a key part of this is actually really surprising. It focuses on something as simple as the English suffix ish. The argument is that when you add ish to the end of a word, it means something has the appearance or the characteristics of a thing, but not its true essence. It signifies resemblance, not reality.
So you can see how this logic is applied. You have Swedish, meaning like someone from Sweden, or Polish, like someone from Poland. The presentation then applies that exact same linguistic test to the term Jewish. The argument put forward is that the word itself means like a Jew, implying a resemblance or a characteristic, but not a direct connection to the actual bloodline of Jacob. From this viewpoint, the term itself is presented as a kind of linguistic admission of a counterfeit identity.
And this is how it all circles back and connects to that logic test we just looked at. The ultimate conclusion offered here is that the creation of the state in 1948 wasn't a divine restoration by Jehovah. Instead, it's framed as an international political intervention, an act of man, not Jehovah. And that, the source argues, is precisely why the promises of peace and safety are not being fulfilled on the ground.
And so this explainer of the source material leaves us with this final, really provocative question. It's a challenge to all of us, really, to consider how we define identity. Is it based on political recognition and outward appearance, or is it defined by the tangible, undeniable fulfillment of Jehovah's promises? The presentation makes its own answer very clear, that true restoration can only come through faith in the salvation of Jehovah, not through politics or the traditions of men.